Blue Antler is a liminal place. A place where knowledge lies in sun-filled meadows, and wisdom slumbers in the deepest shadows of the forest. Profound inner knowing comes when we touch the unknown. Our unions with the mysteries drive us onward. Our liminal conversations explore the lives of those who have touched the unknown. What was it like to experience the mysteries? How did they discover their path? Join my search for whispered secrets and hidden wisdom. Who knows? It may help you discover your path. Welcome back to Blue Antler Podcast. Blue Antler, Whispered Secrets and Hidden Wisdom, a Discover Your Path podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Jennafer Martin. Jennafer is not only a friend of mine, but a very skilled intuitive, coach, Reiki master, and ordained non-denominational minister who lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. She also works with people worldwide. Jennafer offers psychic medium readings for pets and humans, practices and teaches Reiki and energy balancing, teaches various classes on metaphysical topics such as intuition and energy work, offers one-on-one mentoring sessions with intuition and other topics, and officiates weddings. I had a very good conversation with Jennafer, and I learned so much more about her that I actually didn't even know. A lot of the pre-psychic medium acknowledgement phase of life, which I find super fascinating. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Jennafer Martin. And again, welcome back to Blue Antler, Whispered Secrets and Hidden Wisdom, helping me search for the unknown, the unseen, and embracing it. I say okay a lot, but I'm going to start it out with okay. Okay. Before we started, we were talking, and you said to me, I listen for a living. And I realized that I actually don't know that much about you, about your what do we call it? Your past life, as far as what did you do before what I know of you now, which is pet psychic, psychic medium, like the list goes on and on. So where did you grow up?
Oh, great question. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley during the time when the movie Valley Girl was popular. So everyone makes jokes with Valley speak, like for sure, and totally tubular and things like that, and totally grody and what's the other one, like gag me with a spoon and all of those things. Yeah. So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 70s and 80s. And
Did you talk like that?
I did not. I didn't know anyone that did either. So I found that really fascinating when people would just start quoting the movie. And I was too young to see the movie when it came out. I remember.
Yep.
And then I saw it many years later, and it seemed so dated and strange. But no, I never met anyone that talked like that. There were songs about it, and there was a movie, and there was all this stuff. So there must have been somebody talking like that, or, to inspire such, cultural revolutions about the valley I grew up in. But
wow,
I grew up in a valley, and now I live in another valley. I have all these kind of weird parallels to me growing up.
What I love about what you just said is that you live in the in-between. You grew up in the in-between, and you live in the in-between.
Absolutely. Totally. I was we were pretty middle class, but we grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood. And so I went to school with a lot of people that afforded maids and had like new cars on their 16th birthdays. And I was driving my
Wow.
dad's old beat up Chevy that had no power steering at all.
So,
And I got really
yeah,
buff doing
you
it.
have great upper body strength.
um, yeah, so I always I had an experience of being other from the time I was really young. Most people in the valley where I grew up were Jewish. I went to a lot of Jewish like particular rites and rituals like bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and
Wow.
things like that. But I was not Jewish. And now I live in a place that is mostly Christian, but I'm not Christian. So I went from one valley being
Mhm.
other to being in another valley and being other.
I'm slightly jealous that you grew up in a place where you had a lot of exposure to um, the Jewish faith with
Mhm.
people. Um, because I'm totally obsessed with the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and I have a couple friends who are Jewish and or of Jewish descent. Maybe I should say that, but I've mentioned it to them and they're like, "Oh my god, that's exactly how it was." Like that show hits it right, the nail right on the head, and I'm like, "Really?" Because that's fascinating, and I totally want in on that. Like, I love the cultural experience of something different than my rural Utah, which I love very much, but like, I crave that. So, um, okay, now we're not getting down to the tough questions yet, not yet.
Okay.
But what I would like to know is, uh, what was the process then from California to Utah? How did you get here from there?
Um, I went to school, meaning college, in northern Utah. I'm sorry, northern California in the wine country.
Oh wow.
And I met and worked with a member of the LDS faith. And I converted to, I was baptized Catholic as a baby, but that was just so I didn't go to hell in case I died, so the grandparents felt better.
Yes.
Um, and at least the Catholic grandparents felt better. But we never really went to church. I remember in third grade, I was talking to a classmate and she asked me what religion I was. And I was like, I don't know. And I went home and I said, what religion are we? And my mom said, we're Catholic, dear. And then, like 2 years later, I was like, and I went back to school and I'm like, we're Catholic. And she's like, okay. And that was basically it for like 2 or 3 years. And then one day I said, well, if we're Catholic, shouldn't I go to church? And my mom said, your dad can take you. And so he took
Wow.
me to church one Sunday and it was super confusing. I think I was 11. I don't know if you've been to a Catholic mass, but it's like, sometimes the priest says something and you have to say something back, or like you stand up or you
Mm-hmm.
kneel or you sit down, and there's just, it's very aerobic and it's very like interactive, but no one really briefed me on what I was supposed to do, so I
Yeah.
just felt super fish out of water and never necessarily really wanted to go back. But when
Yeah.
I was always curious about religion. I would say my very first like interaction overall with like mystery or with the mysterious or the unseen was just energy. When I was a kid, I
Mm.
could feel the connected energy. We would go to the beach and I would, sit on the shore and just like build sandcastles and stuff, and I felt like I was part of something else. And then I've just always been really sensitive to energy, and so I could feel when something was wrong, even if I didn't really understand it. If somebody was stressed, if like my parents were not big arguers, but they waited till my sister and I went to bed before they argued, and there were like 3 or 4 doors between them, and they didn't really even yell, but I couldn't sleep if there was stress, because I could feel that there was something wrong.
Wow.
So my experience with a lot of things was just my own interconnectedness and trying to make sense of like being comfortable or uncomfortable or connected or not connected. But I was super curious about religion, and I did end up being in a choir at a little local United Church of Christ, which is like the least dogmatic kind of church there is. It's very like, we all believe in God and let's just sit down and enjoy each other, you know. And
Easy.
yeah, super
Super
easy,
easy.
like no tenets or, you know, like that kind of thing. Anyway, but when I met the member of the church, the LDS church, I was 21, and I really was searching for something. I remember I wanted some structure and I really needed answers, and I feel like that faith had a lot of both. Um, so I joined the LDS church in Northern California when I was 21, and I lived a couple of places. I lived in 3 states besides Utah as an LDS person. I lived in Oregon for a short period of time. I lived in Texas for a short period of time. And then I moved here. And within a year of being in Utah, ironically living like a mile from the headquarters of the LDS church, I decided that really wasn't for me anymore. So, but I
Yeah.
moved here partially for a job opportunity, and that's kind of what like brought me to different places, was either job or romance or both. And
Sometimes
that's
romance
why
is a
I'm
job.
here. Well, you know, as far as what brought me here, it was like a job and a man, and the job lasted a lot longer than the
They usually do.
man.
Sorry, that was
That's okay.
cliche and horrible.
I worked in publishing at the time. I've had a very
Oh,
weird career. Yeah, I babysat from the time I think I was 11, and I worked with kids at like day camps, and that's actually where I met the member of the church who introduced me to everything. Was working at a summer camp
wow.
for the YMCA, and I was a nanny and a preschool teacher. So I worked with kids, put myself through school, and then was in publishing. I was an English major, and then I was in publishing for I think 15-ish years.
Wow.
And now I'm a professional psychic. And if you would have told me this is where I would have ended up, I probably would have laughed.
I think most of us would have laughed and yet known deep down inside that that was what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we're going to go back.
Okay.
Thank you for answering my question. As a kid, you're laying there in bed and you're not knowing why you can't sleep, because whatever's happening 4 doors down or 4 doors away is what's keeping you up, and the energy of that. So in those instances, or in the instance of being at the beach, what felt different, or what let me pause for a second and tell you, when I get an image in my head that is a psychic impression that's been placed there, it feels very much like the viewfinder when you click the side of it and the disc spins. So for me, that's how I can tell when it's someone other putting something into my awareness. So now, having said that, what did it feel like, or what was your experience? What was your viewfinder that when you were standing on the beach, or when you were at the beach and you felt this interconnectedness, that there was part of something, you were part of something bigger? What did that feel like? If you even remember, because it was it was like 10 years ago for you. What did that feel like? What made that different than like totally going to school and just like hanging out in the in the hallway with those girls. Had to throw that in
Um,
there at some point. Sorry.
no, I mean, I would expect nothing less.
I was dying.
I would say there are kind of two elements of being at the beach that were a little different. So part of it felt like my imagination was engaged because I didn't just think, oh, I feel like I'm part of something bigger. I literally could see way out. Um, when you're at the beach, you can see to like a horizon point, and then you don't really see much, and so it seems so vast. And then I could see that there were different kinds of waves, like there were waves that formed towards the back, and then there were waves that were kind of crashing, and then there were waves that would come like up to the shore where I was. They were all the same wave, but they had like different iterations and different characteristics and different energies. And so I I was so part of it was me just sort of looking out at all of this and paying attention to the differences, and I think I even like named the different waves, or like, talk to them and that kind of thing. So there was this whole part of like imagination meets connectedness that was really great. And then the second thing is that when I feel really connected, usually I feel pretty peaceful. Like I don't worry about things very much. When there's kind of a, I don't know, a ripple in things, like if my parents were arguing, or if there was some kind of stress, in the family or the neighborhood or whatever, I didn't feel peaceful, but I didn't really know. I didn't have a lot of imagination to be kind of feeling into that or naming it or that kind of thing. I just knew, I just felt unease. And that was honestly just as important as the piece, because I feel like I learned a lot through contrast as much as I did anything else. But I think most of it was either ease or unease. And like that was kind of my language for a long time. Like, how comfortable or at ease did I feel?
I've never heard it explained that way, and I actually really love that. For a couple of reasons. One, I think that's because you're able to describe how that felt as a child, and that language that you're using would be very accessible to kids, and working with children as you did for a long time, and then as sometimes we still do now as psychics and healers. And thank you for that, because I think it's really a brilliant way to put it. And I also think it's too simple for adults, but we all should, if we went by that. I feel a little uncomfortable. Like, I just ate a whole bunch of gluten. I feel really uncomfortable. Maybe I shouldn't do that again. But instead of like chowing down on the rest of the gluten that's in the pantry. So I love that. And let me ask you this then. I have so many questions for you about this, because I think it's fascinating.
Okay.
First question. Did you ever feel hold on. Okay, which one do I ask first? Come on, guys. Which one do I ask first? Okay, this one. At what point did your aging, as we, teenage years, early 20s, at what point did that perspective shift out of I feel comfortable and uncomfortable to a more logical adulting version of that maybe made it easier, but probably for most of us made it harder?
Um,
I guess like when did you consciously then try and name it? Maybe as maybe a better way to put it. Like, when did you put a name to it? versus just a being with it?
I would say probably not until my 30s. I
Oh, okay.
didn't have language for any of this, and I wasn't raised in a in a spiritual household, a religious household. I wasn't raised to think about the mysteries of things or anything like that. So I I think one of the reasons it took me so long, I was such a late bloomer. I mean, I think for a little while I might have called it God because, I was definitely like in a Christian framework. But
Mhm.
even then, my my understanding of what I thought God was often differed from what other people around me thought it was. And I never really got behind any kind of like punitive sort of being. I always felt like one of the gifts of life is when people just meet you where you're at, right? Like they don't try to make you be something else. I think in my
Yeah.
preteens and teens I got very caught up in like what I was supposed to be doing and how I was supposed to act and what was expected of me, and both from my peers and from my family and society. And so I didn't pay attention to whether or not I was comfortable or I had ease or unease, or I just pushed through it if I had unease, and I didn't really pay attention much. I did journal a lot, and that was
Mm.
a really good way for me to at least kind of sift through things. But I don't think I really understood that my language is the language of energy until I was in my 30s. Even though I used it all the time and I interpreted it all the time, I would be, whether I was religious or not, I was often called insightful. I was in charge of special issues at my publisher, and I would just know what would sell and what wouldn't sell. And I got a really weird reputation for being right. When that wasn't what I was trying to do. I just didn't want to make something no one would buy. But I'm also a Capricorn, and I think that informs the framework of who I am. We tend to be very duty bound. We tend to not ask ourselves how we feel. We just ask ourselves what needs to get done.
Yeah.
And I think what ended up happening to me was one of the most spiritual experiences of my life was actually a conversation with my boss at the time. I was in publishing, and she was really unhappy with something I had said in a meeting because she felt that it was disloyal and that it wasn't really backing her up. And she was
Hmm.
and to me, I was just following the rules of the meeting because the rules were like first we bring up the problems and then we bring up the solutions. And we never got to the solution part. So it was very unsatisfying overall. But when my
Yeah.
boss was trying to explain to me why, what I said could be seen as, disloyal to her, I had this really weird moment where she I was trying to explain, but she wasn't really listening to me. She was just sort of listening to respond and just to keep making her point, which is understandable. The whole purpose of the meeting was for her to, share her point.
Yeah.
But at some point she said something like, "I'm not asking you to be a yes man." And then all of a sudden I didn't hear anything else she said. And I heard myself, or kind of saw myself, say, "But that's exactly what you're saying." And if you just need somebody to say yes to everything, then anyone can do my job. And if anyone can do my job, then they can't bring everything to the table that I bring to the table, because I bring my concerns and my solutions and my experience, and it's everything that is me to the table. And so if you really want somebody who just agrees with you, then probably you should get somebody else. And I I literally was having like an out of body
Wow.
experience because I have never spoken back to anyone, not a teacher, not a parent. I'm like the first child. I'm the oldest. Both my parents are the oldest child. We're all built for like obeyance and, rule
Yeah.
following and all of that. And I just remember being like, what are you saying? And why are you saying that? But afterwards, it made me think that if that was true of my job, oh, and I guess I should say my boss didn't fire me. We just agreed to disagree. But and then we went on to
Thankfully.
have like a much better relationship after that. I think I might have scared her a little, but I don't know. Anyway, after that, I realized that if that was true of my job, then that had to be true of my life. And I started looking at what am I doing just because I'm supposed to, instead of because it's really who I am. And it just changed the entire lens through which I looked at my life. And so I have this weird, like, not very typical
Wow.
spiritual experience from being in trouble with my boss at the time. But it started like a whole 3-year period of me just reevaluating and trying to figure out what I really wanted, and literally not even trusting, like, do I even just not like carrots, or did somebody tell me I don't like carrots and that's why I don't eat them? So I guess I should try them again. Like, I just did this whole sort of, I don't know, experimental phase. And just learned in that time that all I needed to do was what resonated with me. And if it didn't give me that ease, I didn't need to do it. And that was pretty much it. And so then I started going, oh, maybe there's something to this. And then I learned a little bit about energy work. And I took a Reiki class, and that started helping me understand that what I really sense is energy. And then that gave me a different kind of framework. It's kind of a long answer.
Uh, I think it's first of all, smart of your boss not to fire you.
Thank you.
Second of all, I feel like you had like the Jerry Maguire moment where like in the beginning where he writes the whole thing like this is how things should be. Like that just came out of you. And I feel like that's pretty brilliant. And I I don't like to use the highlighter in the soapbox, but I believe wholeheartedly that we all have those experiences, and yet we don't, because we can't box it. We don't know how to describe it, so we don't actually contribute that to being a spiritual or a soul or something deeper and more essence based experience, because we can't quantify it, so we don't do it. But once you open that door, hi, welcome to your life's all about to change. So wow. Okay, now I asked Andy this because I had also wondered it myself. Before I interviewed him, I had been thinking to myself, have I had any experiences touching the mysteries when I was, let's say, in the temple?
Oh.
And or in the religion, right? So in my current definition, I also agree that when I'm standing in the stream or when I'm aligned, things are more peaceful and it's just flows. I didn't really think of it that way back then. It was more like, like, where are the burning bush and the tablets and this parting of the sea? Like, where is all this stuff? Where's Joseph Smith? Where's the angel Moroni? Like, come on, guys, give me the sign. And I tried to think back, did I have any of those experiences in, not those, but the other one, in that religion? And I couldn't. I remember times where it was just quiet and peaceful, and I didn't really know it was that. So whether it was within your short stint as a Catholic or in the Mormon religion, did you have any of those moments? And how did, if you had them or didn't have them, how did that how did you see that, or how do you, looking back now, see how that affected your time within those institutions?
Oh, that's a good question. When I was, working with that coworker who was a member of the LDS Church, I had I did have an experience when I was kind of meditating and praying once where I felt not no burning bush or anything, but I did feel like a great like some heaviness come off of me. Um
Mm-hmm.
and I attributed that to I definitely attributed that to not necessarily that the institution was real, but that there was something out there that could help me feel a little better, especially about things maybe I was feeling guilt or shame about, because there's a whole lot of that in so many institutions, religious or non. And so I feel like
Yes.
so that was really helpful for me. I mm, and I did have an experience when I was LDS, and I volunteered as a missionary for 2 years, well, year and a half, for the LDS Church, and they sent me to Japan. And I was walking down the
Wow.
street. I'd been there maybe 4 or 5 weeks, and my command of the language was poor at best, and I was feeling very isolated because I couldn't connect with people through language. I was in for like a just a foreign country. I didn't really recognize any, like and in Japan, like I couldn't even read signs, like things like that. So I was walking down the street.
Scary.
Yes, it was very scary. And I just was feeling very alone. And I had an experience where my companion my companion missionary went off. She was talking to somebody else on the street and walking a little bit in front of me. And all of a sudden, I felt someone standing next to me. And it absolutely felt like the spirit of my maternal grandmother. And so, and she was very clear that I was not alone and that there were many people with me all the time, and that I could just ask them for help if I needed to. And it was very brief. It was I I know sometimes people have a gift where they see spirits. That's not really my gift. I felt her, and I felt her and I smelled her, but I did not see her. And again, that wasn't an experience where it made me go, "Wow, this church is where it's at." But it definitely made me realize that there was help, unseen help out there that I didn't even realize was there. So but I would say most of my experiences within the frameworks of religion were just my intuition. And just, I mean, now that I actually know that's what I had, because I didn't really realize I was intuitive. I didn't realize I had gifts. I just thought I had common sense, and things would just pop into my brain. And I'd be like, well, doesn't everyone know that? And I'd even be at work and be like, how come I know that and you don't? Like, you're my boss. I didn't really,
Yeah.
I was equating like, I must have read it somewhere, or I must have or somebody must have told me, or I must have extrapolated it, or, however you want to say it. My intuition is very much cognizant. So it's like a claircognizance, meaning like I absolutely just know something for no reason. It just pops into my
Yeah.
brain like a little idea, like the clarity of a situation, or what's at the heart of a problem, or how do we get to what's really happening. And then I'm also clairsentient, so I feel, and that's what I experienced more than anything as a kid. I just feel different energies, or I can distinguish between energy. And most of the time I would just have like a moment where I'd just say something like, "Well, why wouldn't we just do this instead?" And people would be like, "That's brilliant." And I'd be like, "Really?" Cuz I just think it's super normal, and it seems like the clearest way to go. Um and then yeah, then
Yeah.
I kind of realized later that that was a little bit more than what I thought it was. But anyway, yeah, that's I never had like a huge vision like you're talking about. Most of what I felt, I felt versus like, saw a sign or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, Thank you for
Sure.
answering that. I remember a couple times in college, when I like before I went on my mission as well, my volunteer of not 2 years, but
Where did you go?
um, uh, my first mission call was to
Oh
Marseille,
no.
France, or yeah, Marseille, France. So I served in the south of France, but I was only there for a month before I was like, uh, I don't really want to be here, and I was having a hard time adjusting, and my mission companion wasn't helpful. That's not his fault at all. I'm just,
I
you
don't
know,
blame you.
it was it's when you don't have a
Hmm.
support system, and we were very different people as well, so it was
Yes.
a little different. But so I came home, and then a year later, told my stake president I want to go back, and he's like, I don't think you're ready. I said, I don't care. I want to go back. So then I went to I was in a small town called Picayune, Mississippi,
Cute.
which was in the Baton Rouge, Louisiana mission. And I was there a month, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like, the religion is for me, I guess, but the mission thing is not. Um, so yes. Oh Lord.
I actually went to France when I was still LDS, and I went to church one day, and the sister missionaries were telling me
Mhm.
that it's a very difficult place to be a missionary because it's mostly Catholic, and it's been Catholic for eons. And I was like, I went to a
Yep.
Buddhist country, so I think like you got one up on me because they already have a concept of God that's shared. But yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that was really hard. And anyway, you're right. It's not just you are like kind of put into a very different situation, and it can be very trying.
And I feel like part of that too is um I had already had 5 years of French. So I had a leg up. And I wish I would have learned, I wish I would have been better prepared about the culture. Um, because, I didn't even draw those connections to, here we go, to our modern day, current times of understanding all of the cultural complexity that we now have with, equality, with gender and race, and like all of those things. Like, I can sit here and say, because I did, there is no racism because my textbook at Tula High School said it was over in the 1960s. But the minute I moved to
Mm.
Memphis, holy cow. I'm like, did you guys didn't go to Tula High? Because like racism's over, like everyone, but we have no clue, right? Like, so stepping into that culture, I was like, holy cow, there is zero. Like, it is not
No.
gone, it is not even hidden. And I wish I would have had more of an understanding of, okay, when I'm talking to these people who live in southern France, which is gorgeous and beautiful, and we drink wine and we're leisurely, um and we also are racist because we don't like the people from Africa and the Middle East, right? I had no idea about that. Um, I wish I would have known more about that. I think because now I just really do feel like looking back on it. I earned my, um, white male privilege soapbox badge at the Boy Scouts of
Mm-hmm.
non-America. Because now just like looking back going, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
was that all about?
I
But
look when I
um
look back, I know that I dealt with a lot of white male privilege on my mission, and I dealt with a lot of ethnocentrism too, because I, you know, I
yeah,
I was there in case people wanted to learn about the church, not to make Buddhist people change into Christians. And I would sit in
yep,
meetings with other people and they would be very frustrated and I'd be like, "But we're guests in this country. I don't understand why you're so stressed. Like this is eons of people thinking that God is basically like a gatekeeper for souls and not anything like what we think of God as." And God with like a lowercase
yeah.
g versus like, so there's a lot of that I look back on and go, I thought it made me like a bad missionary at the time because I wasn't like gung ho, change everyone's minds. But now I think I was probably a better version of a missionary overall.
I would say that is exactly. I think you're right. I think you're perfectly. That's that. It's brilliant. Yes, and uh, so this is one question I was going
Okay.
to ask you a little earlier. All of my friends, um, it's maybe not a question, but kind of. A lot of my friends in college who did not grow up in Utah but came to school to yeah, came to Utah to go to school, at one point or another would look at us and just say, "Man, you guys are weird." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" They're like,
Yes,
"Utah Mormons are not Mormons. They are weird. It's different." Okay, same. You would
absolutely.
agree?
I joined the church in
Okay.
California. It's super laid back. It's very tolerant. And we're not the majority, so I would have to explain things to people like, I was going to a relief society meeting, what the heck is that, things like that. So yeah, I think a lot of
Yeah.
intolerance that I experienced in the church was almost always from people from Utah.
Um, I feel like I just read recently, um, because I don't do tarot or oracle. Like I don't read that way. I have a deck or two, but I just got some from the Conjuring Tree, which you and I both frequent there
Love it.
as readers. Um, oh, absolutely. Uh, it said something about coming out at like coming out. Basically, it was an initiation into the underworld or into death for me. Great. Just another Monday. Um, and but it said coming out of it on the other side, people, when you find people who've come out the other side of that, they're more compassionate and they're more understanding. And I feel like that's exactly what you experienced having I don't think everyone does this because I think you're very
Thank
special,
you.
but I think you're welcome. Coming out of how you grew up and then coming into it from that perspective of I'm a guest in the country, man. Like I, which is a very non-American way to look at things, right? Traditionally, we're here to take over, because we're just so
True.
extra. But um, I feel like that's part of that the wisdom that you brought to that experience for the people that you were with is a very respectful one, and I do think that comes intuitively because, as you said earlier, oh, I think everyone, this is common sense for everyone, right? And then it's like crickets, and they're like, no, of course it's not. What are you talking about?
That's so true.
I
But
don't
I
know.
also
Sorry,
think
I
that
just thought,
I mean, I still grew up a white middle class kid in Los Angeles, but I still had an experience
yeah,
of being other. And so I know like so then when I was in another country or I was in another like all of that it helped me understand. And I often have conversations um with people who are maybe a little more on the like America should be a melting pot side of things where I'm like, yeah, but I
hmm,
actually was a minority when I was in Japan because there were barely any foreigners on the island I was on. and people would literally stop and
Mm,
stare at us and point. And especially my companions that had like gorgeous blonde hair, everyone would be like, oh, I want to touch it.
really?
Yeah, this is in the 90s. It's probably a little more evolved now, but I think like when you've experienced being other, you can, I think it helps you like try and see things from other people's points of view. But also I just think I'm so crazy empathetic that I always try to see it from other people's points of view. And I didn't realize that at the time, but um and then I got so wrapped up in it that I didn't ask what my own point of view was until, my boss
Mm,
made me
mhm.
see some truths. So it's a very interesting balancing act.
I think too, like what you just said about because you're crazy empathetic, and um, those were your
Yep.
words. um, uh, that you were aware of this. Um, is there a line that, or maybe it's a percentage of the pie, that you would call that your, like claircognizance? Like it just kicks in and is just part of what you are. So it's hard to say, oh, it's because I'm in my aware and conscious brain, whatever that means, aware of it and making a conscious decision to do it, or that's just part of the integrated system that is you.
That's a good question. It's a little sort of chicken and egg, isn't it? I think that I am
Yeah.
highly sensitive and I think that I am wired that way. I think it is the way my nervous system is
Mhm.
wired. And so I feel like the claircognizance and the clairsentience are part of my wiring because highly sensitive people are crazy observant. They tend to notice patterns that other people
Yeah.
don't. They tend to be very deep processors. So they're not just like taking something in, they're taking something in and looking at it from so many different points of view. So I would say that I probably was wired this way first, and that was just a part of my experience before I really understood it. But I also think, and this
Mhm.
might be a little like kind of a tangent, but still related. I also think that the way that
I like
I'm glad.
tangents.
I also think that your learning style has a lot to do with your intuition, which also has a lot to do with who you
Yeah.
are and your makeup, right? So, like visual learners by and large tend to have way more clairvoyance than I would. I am not a visual learner. I'm not even really an auditory learner. Auditory learners can have clairaudience a little bit easier because it's just like a little extension of who they are, or that just is their dominant sense or
Yeah.
the way they learn, or that kind of thing. I'm an assimilation learner. So I learn by taking something new and applying it to things I already understand. Like I smash up things I already get and go, oh, so it's like if this meets that, that's what you're trying to explain to me. And so I think that I take everything in to figure it out and to understand it. And I think that's part of where the clairsentience and the claircognizance come in as well.
Um, on my other podcast, Psychic Medium, the podcast, Kelly and I, a couple weeks ago, just discussed what does it look like if we were to normalize and include the clairs as normal abilities, just like touch, see, taste, smell. Like what would that be like? And we were talking about the concept that I've seen this in readings with people and sessions where grandma did it, but grandma doesn't talk about it in the way at all. And grandma doesn't talk about it in the same way because we don't talk about it because that we don't want to, that's not what we talk about. We don't talk about that stuff. And then mom completely doesn't, ignores their gift, and it has some repression and some physical usually ramifications of ignoring the gift. And then the grandchild, who is now in their 20s is like, I want to talk about it all. I'm free with all of this and I'm going to do it all. And like what it's almost, it's the spectrum. It's the swinging of the
Totally.
pendulum from one side to the other completely. And what would it be like if we just said, okay, like, this is what you're doing, and what does that what is your claircognizance tell you about
Yes.
it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I taste it, but it's not in my mouth. Is that weird? How do I do that? You're like, yes, actually, that's one of your other ways of
That would
interacting
be
with
so cool.
life. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I just thought that was fascinating
Mhm.
that kind of rolled into there. Now, I always sound like it's going to be some like deep, like, wow,
And
like,
you'll be like, now,
I don't know.
what's your
It's,
favorite color,
yeah,
Jennafer?
right. Um, so, uh, funny enough, when I would do interviews for Rune Walking in Modern Times, my first three questions are, like, what's your favorite alcohol? What's your favorite food? And where's your favorite place in the world? And I do it because it brings people like
Right.
into their body, right? Like because the touch and the taste and all that stuff, we have memory. So, um,
Okay.
but that's not where we're going um, with this. What I want to ask you is, in your 30s, when you began to be more conscious and interact with these things on a more conscious level, how did that affect that? Um, Sometimes, we put things in a box and it doesn't quite fit, but like the box helps us to organize it, and then we break the box and we move on to bigger things. So, what was your experience like when you began to truly consciously, instead of just letting it flow, but consciously interact with your
I
gifts?
would say it had a couple of phases. One was that I thought maybe I had a very overactive imagination, or I was crazy, or anywhere on that spectrum, because I wasn't ever around a ton of people for which that was a very normal part of life. I got a couple of friends
Yeah.
and a couple of mentors who were able to say, "Oh yeah, people experience that a lot." And that just totally changed my frame of reference. But I would say I still thought I was a little crazy even when I would interact with my guides and my intuition and all of that. It took a long time of me interacting, then having what I thought the message was be real or come to fruition or pan out, however you want to look at it. And then me going, oh, okay, so I can trust that when it comes through because, I've had a certain number of experiences where listening to my intuition has helped me more than not listening to it, or however you want to say it. But until I got to a threshold of that, it was still feeling a bit crazy. Or way imaginative. Like when I was a kid, my mother
Hmm.
would call me dramatic. So that would come up sometimes where I would be like, maybe I'm just being overly dramatic or overly sensitive or all of the things that, I
Hmm.
was told or kind of
Hmm.
internalized as what might be wrong with me. So aside from feeling, a little on the imaginative slash crazy spectrum, the next phase was a little bit of more like imposter syndrome. So it was much more like, why do I know this? Why is this being shown to me? What good is this? Like, am I supposed to do something about it? Am I just supposed to know about it? Why wouldn't it just go to somebody that already knows how to do these things, or that, like that kind of thing? Like, I felt like I wasn't qualified, and I don't exactly know what I thought would
Hmm.
qualify me. um, but I absolutely just remember thinking, like, being annoyed sometimes because I was like, what good is it going to do me to know this about this person, or to, understand the truth of this situation, or to know what magazine we should publish when no one's going to listen to me anyway, like things like that. Because like it kind of ties into this cardinal rule of being a Capricorn, which is that we don't really like to waste our time. And so we will absolutely not
Mm.
do something that we don't think we're going to be good at, because we could be spending our time doing so many other things that we are good at, and it wouldn't be a waste of our time. And so like for me, I'm like, well, if I'm not qualified to do
Yeah.
this, why is it coming to me? And then I would go back to the little crazy / imaginative scale, and then I'd just be annoyed. So and then I just started realizing that it's not really about, I don't know, if I'm qualified, it's if you're open. And I think that that's, I
Mhm.
mean, I was looking at intuition and the mysteries and the unknown as something concrete, like corporate America or something, right? But it's not about that. It's
Yeah.
about
Yes.
access, because you're at least open. And if
Mhm.
you're open even a little bit, then the unseen can absolutely interact with you. And we all, I mean, people feel that even in everyday things, like when people swell with patriotism, or when people get touched emotionally by art, or like any of those things, that's still interacting with the unseen. But I think, or the unknown, I guess.
Yeah.
But I never really had that kind of framework given to me. And then when I realized if I was open,
Yeah.
that was really the only qualifier. I was able to kind of shift my focus. And then I realized that I was too open, and I was getting kind of overwhelmed, and I had to
Hmm.
sort of dial it back and have some good boundaries and things like that. And so it's definitely one of those things that you have to sort of experience to figure out where, if anywhere, the boundaries are, um, or where what works for you and
Yeah.
what doesn't. And it's so personal. I feel like I could tell you exactly where mine was, but then yours may be in a completely different zip code than mine. So I find it to be
Yeah.
such an individualized concept and process, and it's pretty fascinating.
I think I think this is like the prime example of when we teach classes, or when we present, and when we're working with people, it's about, and I think, okay, I think we have a hard time as students and teachers wrapping our heads around the concept and the idea of being a shepherd or a guide instead of the guru. People want us to tell me how to do it. Tell me how to do it. I'm like, no, like, dude, you got to figure out that for yourself. Like, lavender does not calm me. I've said that on
Me
every
either.
podcast, I swear, over the last month. Um,
No.
it doesn't, but for some people it does. Great. So what work? I
Hmm.
love that. What works for me is not going to work for you all the time. And yeah, I I feel too a bit like you. Thank you, by the way, for attending my 30-minute that turned into
It
an
was
hour and a half
great.
class at the Conjuring Tree. Um, and I don't know why this is like the my hill to die on lately, but people, like, it helps. I love going back and reading my journals and saying, "Oh, I was like, that's what I. Oh my gosh, like I've come a long way." Um, I wish I would have known at that point to start making observations about how things felt, and what, like the dictionary, the encyclopedia, the recipe book, however we want to put that, so that I could string together the wins and make more sense of it
Yes.
quicker. I feel like my development would have like would have been like leaps and bounds quicker, because my confidence in those abilities would have grown leaps and bounds. And so that whole process of like, man, I've been there, and it's a hard process, because it's like, who do you go to check your answers with? Like, you're the only one in your team, your spirit team, are
Yep.
the only ones who can really do that for you. So, if and when we make it through that, it's golden. So, I appreciate you
Thank
hanging
for
out with
having
me
me.
today, by the way. And I want to ask one more question. And my question to you is this: what advice do you have for people who are experiencing things that they can't explain and can't understand? What is your advice to them for how to deal with that? And everyone listening, by the way, we're not licensed psychologists, and we're not going to prescribe you anything, and we cannot diagnose any of your things. So when I'm talking about the unknown and the unseen and having these experiences, it is not because we're talking about those situations. So I have to tell you that now, that we cannot diagnose that. And yes, I just feel like sometimes that's necessary. I'm sure you've had clients too. I've had sessions with people where I'm like, you need a therapist, and um, and I'm fairly certain some sort of
Yep.
other chemical help. And those are few and far between, but
Yes.
they're the hardest client. Yeah. So now, what is your advice?
I would say, first of all, that I don't think there's anything wrong with you if you're experiencing things that maybe you don't understand. I I think even if it is indicative of a chemical imbalance, it is still important to acknowledge what's going on and not try to explain it away. I would also say find, like-minded people to talk to about this. It doesn't have to be I mean, it can be a professional person or a mentor. It could also just be like a spiritual group that meets and you can kind of ask some questions, because there's something about being around other people that experience things similar to yours that helps you not just get a lot of good support, but also get a lot of great ideas for how to interpret it. And I think I would also say, if you do go like find a mentor, for example, expect to outgrow your mentor, or expect to know that there's only a certain amount of things that someone can teach you, because everything you're learning is very personal, and you're a mentor can teach you, like, can should be able to guide you to a certain point so that you can trust yourself and then move forward trusting yourself and whatever you believe in, or whatever kind of help, unseen help that you have, or that kind of thing. Because if I don't know. I've outgrown many mentors, and not because I think I'm beyond them. I'm just different than them, and they were great at teaching me certain things. Like, I had a tarot mentor, and I had a talking to spirits mentor, and all kinds of things. But then at some point, it's really just about you and how you interact with things, and what it means to you personally. So I would also say, instead of asking yourself really like big questions like, what does it mean that I'm getting these, messages or experiences or whatever, I'd say, what does it mean to you? Because it's always personal, and the sooner you can kind of figure out what things are to you, the more you'll start to trust yourself.
So, what did you think? I can't even tell you it. I could have spoken with Jennafer for probably hours and hours more, and we probably will do it in another episode sometime in the future. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to complete the social media ritual, which is like, share, hit the notifications, all that other fun stuff. Don't forget that if you love it, please do share it with your friends. This podcast is special to me. So if it's special to you, please feel free to share it just like I do. Until next time, thank you again for listening to Blue Antler, Whispered Secrets and Hidden Wisdom, a Discover Your Path podcast.